This is an R34 Nissan Skyline GTR. Well, it's not a real one because I do live in America, and at this time in 2017 this car is still illegal to import. So the closest I've ever been to driving one of these is playing a video game. I did drive an R35 around a racetrack one time, but I don't think that counts. But with all of that, this car still somehow managed to become a legend, a mythical beast, with hordes of followers who worship at the temple of JDM. So how does a car that was never sold in the US, and that most of us have never driven, still manage to attain God car status? Well, I think I have the answer to that question. Before I go any further, let me just say this is how I fell in love with the GTR. It might be totally different for you, but I'm the one who's making the video, so yeah. The short answer to this question can be summed up in two words: pop culture. The 80s, 90s, and 2000s were a time when the US was absolutely infatuated with Japanese culture and their products. Whether it was anime, video games, or cars, everyone I knew growing up watched Pokemon, Digimon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Initial D, Transformers, Akira, and yeah, Transformers was an American show, but it was based off a Japanese toy. Maybe I'll make a video on that later. And that Japanese culture kind of bled into the car culture too. Especially in like the early 90s to early 2000s-ish, that's when you really saw the JDM scene come to fruition. Growing up in an Asian neighborhood, or as an Asian kid, you saw every guy had either a Civic, a Type R, or something like that. The really cool guys had S2000s, if they were super loaded. A lot of 180SXs, things like that, and that was reflected in the media. Now, the first time I saw a Skyline was actually in a film called Too Fast, Too Furious. It was driven by the late, great Paul Walker. Or actually by his character, Brian. Now, seeing the Skyline in that film was something different. I mean, yes, you see the S2000s, you see the Evos, you see the Mustangs, you see all those cars in real life. But I never saw a Skyline. And in my third grader mind, that made this car special, that made this car almost a myth, if you will. It made it something elusive. And as the Fast and Furious franchise grew bigger and bigger, so did the car. It grew with Brian, if you will. The car became as synonymous with Brian as the Dodge Charger became with Dom. It became almost indiscernible to separate the character from the car. Even in Paul's final Fast and Furious appearance, he drove an R35, and in that scene where they all came back to LA, where they came back to their roots. And that makes the car more than just a car to a lot of us fanboys. And that elevated the car's film notoriety to the same level as the Mustang from Gone in 60 Seconds, the 57 Plymouth from Christine, the Beetle from Herbie. It made this car a star, it made this car an icon. And since we couldn't experience this car in real life, well, we couldn't anyway because we were just kids, but that's where the video games come in. That's where all of our real experience with this car was. And the video games made this car into a legend. I'm pretty sure Jeremy Clarkson said it best when he said that the R34 was a car designed for the PlayStation generation, because that's where it reached the bulk of its marketing base, was through video games. It was put on the same level as Lamborghinis and Ferraris, and with modifications through games like Need for Speed, Forza, Gran Turismo, this car was a world beater. And that's where part of the mythos of the GTR came in. Part of it did boil down to the whole forbidden fruit phenomenon. When I say forbidden fruit, what I mean is people want something even more knowing it's illegal. I remember being in school and we would speak in hushed tones about why such an amazing car was illegal in the States. Rumors were going around, and after a time those rumors made its way into the legend. It was too powerful, people would say. They made it illegal because a cop car wouldn't be able to keep up. Another would say, but they sell Lambos and Ferraris. Someone blurted out after a while that must mean that the GTR is faster than them all. And that hype, that legend, that mythos added so much more to the GTR that made this car a king, that made the Godzilla moniker something that the car had earned through racing in Japan and in Europe, something that we had never heard of before, means something even more in our minds. This wasn't just a car or a piece of metal or something that our family members owned. This car was a huge part of our childhood. It was an urban legend almost. Actually, it was a legend. And that is why the second this car turns 25, I'm going to try my best to go to Japan and get one. I was born in 1995. This car came out in 1999. So by the time I get my hands on one of these cars, I'll be 29 or more. I'll probably be in my 30s. And I'll have waited the full 25 years to get this car. I will have waited the majority of my life to drive this car. And the day that I get to Japan, I will reference this video explaining what this car means to me and what this car means to countless other kids who grew up in the 90s and early 2000s. This car is almost a signal point of our generation. Just like the Mustangs were in the 60s, and hell, the Mustangs were part of our generation too. But they weren't made into legends like the GTR Skyline was. Anyway, that was my video, guys. If you like it, hit like. If you want to see more, hit subscribe. I finally got one of those little HDMI capture recorder thingies, and I do plan on using it a lot. And I finally got my blue snowball out from under my bed after like a year of sitting there. So some interesting videos are going to be coming out. Anyway, have a good one, do whatever you do on the internet, and have fun. I guess that's what we're all here for.